director of the Wendland Cook program here at Vanderbilt Divinity School. Really happy to have you all here with us tonight, virtually and in person. I'm just going to really quickly introduce our director, Dr. Joerg Rieger, who's the Distinguished Professor of Theology here at Vanderbilt University in the Divinity School. Dr. Rieger founded the Wendland Cook program in 2019, and we work at the intersection of economics and ecology. We talk about our work in really three ways, that it's interfaith, international, and intersectional. So we're really happy to have Dr. Sung here with us tonight, who is a wonderful representation of the third generation of liberation theology. Without further ado, Joerg, please come on up.
Thank you, Aaron, and thanks to all of you for being here. This will also be live streamed and then recorded, so we greet you all here, and then whoever will watch this synchronously and asynchronously, difficult words to pronounce. And thanks to Aaron as the Associate Director of the program. He's done a lot of work and he's really helped make this program flourish in many ways. So check us out. If you don't know us yet, there's a lot of cool stuff happening. It is my role tonight to introduce Professor Jung Mo Sung, who is with us from Brazil. Professor Sung is an old friend of mine. We met over 20 years ago in Brazil, and we hit it off right away, and we never stopped talking. Picking up from the airport on Sunday morning at Nashville Airport, we said hello for about 5 seconds and started a theological conversation. So this is how he runs, and I just follow, and I'm very happy to be part of it. Professor Jung Mo Sung is, if you want to classify or maybe historicize liberation theology, part of the third generation of Latin American Liberation Theology. Everybody knows, of course, about the first generation, Gustavo Perez, the Boff brothers, Jon Sobrino, and many others. And of course, Professor Sung's teachers, Franz Hinterlammer, Hugo Assmann, Julio de Santa Ana, various names here that some people might remember. But there's a third generation that is doing enormous work that is really moving the thing forward. This is not repeating what was once said 50 years ago, but this is building a new conversation based on some of the old ones, also challenging some of the old ones. The first, or not the first, but one of the early books by Professor Sung was on economics, which he identified as the absent theme of liberation theology. People always think, well, liberation theology is about economics and poor people, but there's some lacks here which he then helped fill out, and this is part of what we're talking about in many ways. 23 books later, he's here tonight. His books having been translated in many languages, always written in Portuguese, mostly published in Spanish, some in English. We co-authored the book in 2009, Beyond the Spirit of Empire, with our common friend Néstor Míguez from Argentina. And so there's so much going on that I don't want to spend too much time now just telling you about it, because we have to experience it. This is part of our lecture tonight. And having Professor Sung here is really not only a personal pleasure and honor, but I think this is the sort of thing that we're doing here at Vanderbilt's Divinity School, which has this old title of being the school of the prophets, but we're always defining and redefining what prophecy is. So if you think prophecy is mostly protesting, maybe doing an action or two, there's more. And this is what we're talking about. We're filling in some of the blanks. We're building things. We're actually not just dreaming. It's not just utopia, it's also utopia, as you will hear tonight. But there's some real work going on in the grassroots among people, and not just in Latin America, but nationally in the U.S. and internationally as well. So this is all reasons why it is great to have Professor Sung here, who was born in Korea, moved to Brazil when he was fairly young, 8 years, 9 years old, something like that, and closes with him coming here tonight. So thank you so much for being with us, Professor Jung Mo Sung. Let's give him a hand. Yes, please, from the lecture. So what will be next is the presentation by the professor, and then a response by my colleague, Professor Shepherd here again with the Néstor and myself. And then we want to have a real discussion, so take notes, take mental pictures perhaps, and feel free to raise the good questions. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. So, first of all, I would like to thank the Relevant Book Program in Religion and Society, Injustice, and Vanderbilt University Divinity School for inviting me here to present some theological reflections from the perspective of Latin American Liberation Theology on two of the great challenges of our time: serious social inequality and the environmental crisis. As this is my first time here, I don't have much information about the themes and authors discussed here. So, to make it easier for me, I want to present some themes and ideas in dialogue with the book Theology and the Capitalocene by my longtime friend Rieger. As Paulo Freire said, dialogue is not or should not be a mere meet and new relationship, but rather of one of human beings who find themselves mediated by real common problems and challenges in the world. In this sense, dialogue can only be true and fruitful to the extent that the people who takes part in it shares a love of the world and of human beings, especially of those who suffer. I thought that.
It's on, but I think I need to hold it closer.
Yeah. In the process of dialogue, one of the first points in the debate is how, coming from different theoretical starting points and cultural and existential experience, can we pronounce common problems or challenges. Therefore, the first point I want to introduce is the notion of social inequality and environmental crisis. In many documents and studies on social problems at a global level, we find the major problems of social inequality or the ratio of the 1% of the world reaches to the 99%. But from the Latin American Liberation Theology perspective, in this very typical analysis of modern social sciences that quantifies data and classifies it, we run the risk of losing sight of what is most fundamental, the struggle between life and death. Let's imagine that no one, or almost no one, is at risk of dying from hunger or lack of basic health care. This inequality would generate a problem of legitimization of the wealth distribution system in society, but it wouldn't be a problem of a life and death. At most, it would be a problem of frustration of non-rich because they can fulfill certain desire, but not the threat of death. For the liberation theology, the central theme and ultimate criterion of discussion on economic, social, and theological issues should be the life and death conflict. In this sense, the fundamental issue is not social inequality as such, but rather whether or not it's possible for human beings to realize their right to live with dignity. The very important discussion of identity issues presupposes that these human beings are alive, and in the capitalist system, the conditions and requirements for being alive is to have access to the market. And what is making it impossible for a significant part of the world population to live a dignified life is, first and foremost, the process of exclusion from the market system. The current capitalist market system doesn't kill directly, but indirectly insofar as it doesn't allow them to live. In this sense, the problem of the environmental crisis must also be analyzed and interpreted from the perspective of life versus death. However, we must remember that life as such does not exist or should not be understood as a substance that exists in itself independently of the lives of other living beings and other non-living elements that exist in the world. When we talk about life, we must ask, whose life? Life and death are part of the universal cycle of the appearance and the disappearance of all beings, living or non-living. So, if we don't establish some criteria for ethical human discernment, we could fall into the common error in the modern natural science, where in the universe there would be no qualitative difference between the explosion of a distant galaxy, the disappearance of a species of animals, and the genocide of a people that disappears in the history. There is an unconscious and implicit process in modern science that there is no qualitative difference between the fall of a stone because of the law of gravity and the death of a poor starving child because of the law of the market. There is a famous explanation by Paul Anton Samuelson, Nobel Prize winner in economics, about the laws of the market. Quote, when a market economy is working well to do what is only fitted to do, John Rockefeller's dog will get the milk which a poor working child with rickets cannot get. Unquote. Everything would be result of universe governed by immutable laws. The search for truth through science presupposes the possibility of us humans knowing the truth as such. This process has as its horizon and ultimate goal the arrival of perfect knowledge. This presupposes that there is or will be an omniscient being as well as as individual or collective beings, or as the neoliberals think, a self-organizing process, the free market. And as Wittgenstein said in his famous lecture on ethics in 1929, in the imaginary book that contains all the knowledge of the universe, quote, it would contain nothing that we call an ethical judgment or anything that would logically imply such a judgment. The notion of an omniscient being is the foundation of the denial of substantive ethics in theoretical scientific discussion and the reductions of ethics to functional problems within a system. In order to recover the importance of ethics in the dialogue with the science in the face of the problem of social inequality in the environmental crisis, we also need to discuss the issue of philosophy of science and epistemology. We need to think about the science assuming that there is not and will not be an omniscient being, and that is why we need to discuss ethical issues and political options in dialogue with science. Someone in name of Christian faith or theology could say that there is such a being, that God is omniscient. Without going too far into this discussion, I want to recap a dialogue between Jesus and his disciples about the science of the day of judgment. That is, the problem of omniscience in Jesus or in Revelation. Jesus says, quote, but of that angels of heaven, but my Father alone. Unquote. The fact that evangelists states that not even Jesus knows it is important for our discussion here, since we recognize that there is no such omniscient being within the natural world, especially in the field of human actions and choices. We must articulate scientific analysis and ethical questions within the debate on the environmental crisis. For example, the question, whose life? Scientific theories and theologies that start from the notion of omniscient being, whether God is omniscient or not, lead to unjustified social and ethical insensitivity toward the suffering of human beings. To say that not even Jesus knows the day of judgment means that we will never fully know the deepest causes and reasons for events, personal choice, and suffering. What we can do is defend everyone's right to live. When dealing with human lives, we must remember that human beings is a being of bodily needs, and that in order to stay alive, we have to have access to basic food, air, housing, but he is also a being of desires. Satisfying basic needs is the condition for realizing oneself as a human being who wants to be more. In this sense, as well as being alive, human beings want to be recognized by other people in their environment, want their lives to have meaning, and want to be more. The conflicting relationship between A, bodily material needs to reproduce their lives, B, the biological existential need to be recognized by others, and C, the desire to be and belong to a community which the person imagines as special and which gives them a utopian identity, that is, an image of someone who is about to become a full or perfect being. All things make up the main causes of social struggles. On the issues of the environmental crisis, we must be clear that there are important sectors of world society that do not recognize the seriousness of this crisis, or rationally accept the existence of the crisis, but their unconscious desire lead them to defend policies and social practices or customs that reproduce and amplify the crisis. We, thus, find various processes of rationalization of irrational practice and systems. This process of rationalizing something that is irrational is leading us to a process of collective suicide. These two crises, that of exclusion of the poor and social inequality, and that of the environmental, are not, as we know, two independent crises, but are two sides of the same modern civilizing process driven by the human desire to free oneself from the human condition and become divine, or in more contemporary terms, transhuman. In essence, we are dealing with the desire for infinity, the modern way of dealing with the desire to be beyond of the limits of the body and institutional life. When we criticize capitalism, and with this criticism we use the concept of Capitalocene in a negative way, we must not forget that this capitalist system is the one that a large part of humanity believes to be bearer of good news, the promise of the fulfillment of the deeper human desire. The promise of the good news of capitalism have led many societies to abandon the pre-modern way of life and take on the spirit of capitalism. Francis Fukuyama calls it the path to the fulfillment of all current and future desires, saying, quote, technology makes possible the limitless accumulation of wealth, and thus the satisfaction of an ever-expanding set of human desires. Such societies have become increasingly linked with one another through global markets and the spread of a universal consumer culture. Unquote. This thesis that there is no alternative to capitalism, espoused by thinkers such as the neoconservative Fukuyama and by liberal and neoliberals, is the backdrop to social, economic, and environmental discussion. Recognizing that the object of our problem is the project of modernity itself, which was defended and operationalized by modern reason, must make it clear that modern rationality cannot be main instrument for overcoming it. That's why, before we move on the discussion of the theme of capitalism, let's delve a little deeper in the question of the relationship between reason and utopia. The topic is the critique of utopian reason. At the beginning of the book Theology in the Capitalocene, Rieger says, quote, this book is dedicated to a closer look at what causes uneasy and discomfort in our time, leading to the growing destruction and death of people and the planet. Only when the causes are addressed in depth can real alternatives be developed, which is a goal of this text. Unquote. I fully agree with this statement and would like to address another aspect of this relationship between a deeper analysis of the causes of the crisis and an alternative civilization. There are two ways of analyzing. So there are two ways of analyzing the cause of the problem we face. One is to analyze an object within a social system that is not questionable and cannot be critically analyzed. For example, in the pre-modern European society, it wasn't possible to study religious systems that sustain it, but rather to study social facts on the basis of theological principles. However, in the transition from the medieval world to modern society, religion as such became an object of study. The creation of religion as a subject of scientific analysis, that is, religion as a modern object distinct from the sphere of the public life, is an invention in the process of secularization. And in this process of secularization, the modern world won the struggle against the pre-modern world. With the consolidation of the modern capitalist world, what was expected happened. The foundation of modern reason and the structuring principles of the dominant social system became the point from which to analyze an object or social fact. In this way, the problem of social inequality and the environmental crisis come to be analyzed and discussed based on the acceptance of capitalism as something natural, unquestionable, or the most efficient system for solving these problems. Another perspective of economic, social, and environmental analysis would be to criticize this assumption and analyze the capitalist system as an object of analysis. So, analyze the capitalist system as an object of analysis and come to the conclusion that the best solution to these problems would be to create another economy, a capitalist economy. When we want to analyze the problem of the double crisis outside the parameter of capitalism, we need to think about the point of view of a social totality and horizon of meaning that does not yet exist. The relationship between the object of the analysis and the totality which we think is a condition for the possibility of human knowledge. Thus, we need to be clear that this analysis and interpretation of the ethical and social problem of the environmental and social crisis presupposes the creation of a totality that does not yet exist historically, but only intellectually imagined and visualized. In other words, one can only radically criticize the capitalist utopia by visualizing an alternative utopia or a transcendental concept. In this sense, it's important to remember that reality is at the same time what exists and what can be, that which does not yet exist, but is on the horizon of historical feasibility. In Kantian's terms, we can say that the possibility of gaining a deeper understanding of the two crises of the social inequality and the environmental crisis presupposes a transcendental concept, a concept that doesn't exist as a concrete entity, but exists as an absent one that allows us to see more clearly what this crisis is and the possibilities for solution. That is, the utopia of a society in which all human beings are included, living in dignity, and that the relationship between human beings and their environment is not destructive to themselves and other non-human beings. In other words, to have a deeper and broader understanding of the causes of the crisis, we need to have a utopian horizon or transcendental concept of one alternative society to the capitalist utopia. It is the discovery or creation of a utopia of a society in which all human beings participate worthily in social life that shows that the utopia of unlimited accumulation of capital to the point of endangering life on the planet is something clearly irrational. In anthropological or subjective terms, we need to unveil the irrational desire for unlimited consumption of goods and people reduces to the condition of merchandise, which is the theme of Marx's commodity fetish. In order for Marx to elaborate his theory of the commodity fetish, he needed a transcendental concept of the kingdom of freedom, capable of imagining a productive relationship in which workers were not exploited, and in which the economic relationship was between human beings and other human beings, and not a social relationship between commodities and other commodities. In other words, a fetishized relationship in which the lives of human beings depends on the movement between commodities on the market. In the same way, Jesus' proclamation of kingdom of God is the transcendental utopian imagination that allows people to realize that their situation of suffering is not natural or the result of God's punishment for their sins, but the human injustice. It is this faith that the kingdom of God is at hand, and that this allows his disciples to see reality differently, and to act and fight differently. Faith is seeing the reality that exists from what is it is not, but should be. And it leads you to act on that and fight. For this reason, a true critique of capitalism, capitalocene, or capitalocentrism cannot be only analytical, but must also generate a spirit that mobilizes social, religious, and political movements marked by solidarity with people who are suffering. This relationship between an alternative utopia and social actions and struggles cannot be understood as a relationship between the present and future, mediated by the progress as modern reason has thought. We humans are capable of imagining a desirable, perfect utopian horizon, but we are not capable of overcoming the limits of history and human condition. Desire is not power, just as there are good and bad desires. Desires that are impossible at the moment, but possible in the future. And also, importantly, there are desires that are not feasible within history or the human condition. We are being capable of imagining impossible desires and following into the illusion that we are, or that there are supernatural or superhuman beings capable of fulfilling all our desires within history. That's why we need to be clear that the utopian concept or transcendental concept are concepts of imagination that allow us to see A, what reality is, B, what it isn't, and C, what it could be. But this utopian imagination, which is necessary for us to move toward the future or our goals, is not fully possible within history. Knowing and accepting the difference between the desired utopian horizon and the limits of human action is a spiritual wisdom or personal maturity and a necessity for an effective political struggle. Those who confuse what they want with what is possible fall into political and operational errors. They fall into the errors of not doing what is possible within the objective condition of history in the name of something that is very desirable but impossible. This relationship between the analysis of reality and the alternative utopian horizon to the capitalist utopia, with its transcendental concept of free market, bring us to the next topic, the synthesizing metaphor of the system we want to decide. Jung Rieger, together with other authors, proposed that instead of Anthropocene concept used for the last few decades to understand our age, the Capitalocene concept is more appropriate. Quote, a closer look at the relevance of capitalism to our thought suggests a change of terminology. More appropriate than the term Anthropocene would be the term Capitalocene, given that in the current situation, capital power, and nature are closely related. In other words, blaming humanity as a whole for climate change and ecological destruction misses the flows of the power that determine our age. The same could be true for blaming religion as such for all science, natural or social. Unquote. As the human species, in its interaction with the biosphere and with geological time, is not homogeneous, but is subdivided into hierarchically distinct social groups or classes, the discussion about Capitalocene makes a lot of sense, especially when it comes to the different causes and responsibilities for the problem and responsibilities for possible solutions. The theme of path to solution is important and should be part of the discussion about appropriate concepts. For example, in the transition from the medieval to the modern world, the defenders of the modern world criticized the theocentric and religious vision of the world and proposed a vision centered on the notion of the human as a fundamental concept and principle for the analysis of what was wrong in society and the utopian proposal of the emancipation of the human being, or humanism. Nowadays, we find critiques of the modern world who contrast the notion of anthropocentrism with the theocentric vision of life, or others who propose a postmodern or postcolonial or decolonial vision criticizing modern anthropocentrism without clearly defining what the new principles of criticism and proposed alternative would be. In other words, the debate on the Anthropocene or Capitalocene only makes sense insofar as we are discussing the causes and possible solution to the environmental and social crisis. The notion of the Anthropocene and the Capitalocene are recent. In the 1980s and 1990s, when the world woke up to the ecological problem, the discussion about the causes of the environmental crisis was not centered on the notion of Anthropocene, but something similar, anthropocentrism. As Rieger says, quote, the basic cause of ecological destruction and climate change is not anthropocentrism, as White argued, but the economic system of capitalism that organizes human action. In the so-called Capitalocene, not all of humanity, and not even the majority of humanity, is driving the exploitation of the non-human environment and benefit from it. Unquote. From this quote, we can ask, is there a direct relationship between the notion of anthropocentrism and that of Anthropocene to the point that we can move on from the anthropocentrism directly to the question of the Capitalocene? Or is the Capitalocene an analytical concept that shows us the causes of the crisis, but not necessarily capable of pointing the way to an alternative civilization? As I have said above, an analytical concept that criticizes the causes of the problem must, at the same time, offer a new horizon for interpreting the path that can be built. Otherwise, we run the risk of making a metaphysical critique, that is, a critique that denies what exists but offers no way of overcoming it. In other words, in the opposition between the concept of anthropocentrism or the Anthropocene versus the Capitalocene, we should ask ourselves, what indication does the critical concept of the capitalism offer for an alternative utopian horizon? In this sense, I would like to bring up a reflection by Francis Kilmer on the problem of anthropocentrism in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Quote, human beings can only think in anthropocentric terms. Anthropocentrism is an ontological condition of thought. However, what appears in the Western tradition as anthropocentrism does not place man at the center of thinking about himself and nature. It replaces man with abstractions, especially the market and capital. It is market-centrism or capitalocentrism. It removes the human being from its central place in order to destroy it along with nature. By putting the human being at the center, the market and capital have to lose the place. By putting the human being at the center, the market and capital have to lose that place. That is the only way to truly put the human being at the center. But by putting man at the center, it turns out that he can't exist without putting nature at his side. Unquote. In this quote from Hitler, we don't find a relationship of opposition between anthropocentrism versus Marxocentrism or capitalism, but rather a dialectical relationship between a abstract anthropocentrism, the capitalocentrism, and C, concrete anthropocentrism with an articulate relationship with nature. In this sense, Hinkelhammer proposed a new humanism in which human beings in community act in solidarity with other people, especially those who suffer, defending the right to live in dignity of all human beings, recognizing the limits of history and human condition. This implies recognizing that it is not possible to organize the economy at regional and global level without mercantile relations. That is, without the market and without capital relations. But at the same time, having fundamental human rights and democracy as the fundamental principle of social, economic, political organization, and a new relationship between human beings and nature. The construction of a new type of social relationship and relations between humans with non-human living beings and non-living nature needs to have a new ultimate criterion for decision. Capitalism's ultimate criterion is economic efficiency in pursuit of unlimited wealth accumulation. This formal criterion and the free market system have generated a historical process that the Bible calls idolatry. That is, a sacred system that demands sacrifice of human lives in the name of the idol, the man-made God, Mammon, or the capital, an abstract entity elevated to the category of the divine. In this sense, Hinkelhammer and other liberation theology thinkers propose that the great contribution of the theology in this era of Capitalocene or Marxocentrism should be the critique of the idolatry of free market and capital, and the struggle to recover the place of the human beings and nature in creation. In this search for new humanism, we know that human beings are beings of desires and needs, of selfishness and solidarity, of envy and generosity. In other words, we are deeply contradictory and complex beings. Capitalism was born and grew up driven by its spirit. Capitalism was born and grew up driven by spirit. I'm sorry, I thought. Yeah, I lost connection. So, yeah, nice. Okay. In this search for new humanism, we know that human beings are beings of desire and needs, of selfishness and solidarity, of envy and generosity. In other words, you are deeply contradictory and complex beings. Capitalism was born and grew up driven by its spirit, which Weber called spirit of capitalism. And this idolatrous spirit that worships capital is putting the future of humanity and our planet at risk. For this reason, the debate on the Capitalocene or Marxocentrism or capitalocentrism is more than sociological or social ethic issues, but is or should be one of the fundamental theological themes of our time. Thank you.
So we have not discussed, yes, please, we have not discussed.
Speak on.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Just for our online viewers that are having a hard time hearing.
Yeah, let's make sure, is this good?
Even louder.
It's on a little bit.
Keep it going. Keep it talking.
You good, right? maybe this one
That
will
one
get
works.
us a little bit more. We have not discussed the order of responses, but let me suggest that my colleague, Professor Phyllis Shepard, go first. I'll go second, and then immediately after the responses, let's go into a conversation of Professor Jung's presentation. Thank you so much for it. There's much to be discussed. I appreciate you engaging some of our concerns. And as I can assure you, the concern of doing a good program is always a matter of addressing the questions of what difference does it make and how do we build alternatives. So critique is important, but the building of alternatives, I think, is where we're heading. So Professor Shepard, let me hand this microphone to you. That one seems to be working.
Good afternoon. Is there a feedback? Is it okay?
Yeah, it's okay. You're good.
I'll work it out.
I'm pleased to be here, and I want to thank Joerg and Jung for inviting me to the table. Those of you who know me know that I tend to reflect, and that's what I'll do. Let me begin with, is there a God? Is not the my question, but rather, who cares, and what difference does such a claim make in the struggle to live a life worth living without gripping gut pains and empty stomach and announcing hunger and terror imposed from on high, offered as the primary sources of our desires and longing? We might ask, what is the good news when greedy desires rain down on the people and the earth and are disavowed, rendered unconscious, and normalized in social exchanges with liturgical-like precision? I am reminded of Emily Town's discussion of the deep interior material life of evil in the cultural production of evil. This interior life, if it is to be dismantled, must conjoin ethical commitment and social action. In other words, we are wrestling with, or have to wrestle with, how our very desires are cultivated and sustained, even when such attachments work against our very lives and those who make up the communities to which we lay claim. And what I'm trying to get at here is that even within movements aimed at social justice, dismantling inequalities, the desires that have been cultivated within us make us not only turn on ourselves, but those with whom we call ourselves to be in solidarity with. To the crises of social inequality and the environmental crisis, I think we can see that the battering of environment is always made with the promise of a kingdom, implications, that includes the promise of the new human who feels healthier and able to acquire more goods and trinkets. We have been malformed to accept and believe that social inequality is temporary and will be repaired with a few theological tweaks and a few more dollars and our accepting necessities as gifts. And of course, what I'm getting at, you know where I'm going, but what we need to live is piecemeal handed out. And then those who are at the bottom of the barrel are supposed to say, thank you. In this scenario, there is no utopian imagination that, in quotation marks, Dr. Jung Sung, that allows people to realize that their situation of suffering is not natural or the result of God's punishment for their sins, but of human injustice. Because the imagination we need requires wrenching ourselves, a wrenching process of which Fanon speaks, where desires are torn asunder from the systems, theologies, and spiritualities of control that are embedded in enlightenment dreams and nightmares of rational discourse as the path to freedom. The path needed is the road to solidarity, and solidarity can only be realized on the road to the suffering we avoid and disavow. The imagined utopian worlds we so often hear articulated are those in suffering by imposed social injustice, is named but disembodied. It is conceptualized to the point that stabbing hunger pains never make their way on a page, and the terror of a people's life and culture being obliterated produces a social analysis without people. Such are the blocks to solidarity. This is, I think, the unethical attempt at solidarity because it does not change our relationship to the economic systems on which we have come to depend, to the living and non-living, and to therefore how we think theologically and act socially. Of course, I'm agreeing with my colleague that the transformation that is needed requires us to act. It is not enough we cannot think our way into what is needed. As already has been stated, we are a complex people. There's no quick and easy fix. Frances Kendall talks about this in her discussion of privilege. We need to be clear that there's no such thing as giving up one's privilege to be outside the system. One is always in the system. The only question is whether one is part of the system in a way that challenges or strengthens the status quo. Privilege is not something I take and which therefore have the option of not taking. It is something that society gives us or not, and unless I change the institutions that give it to me, they will continue to give it, and I will continue to have it, however noble and equalitarian my intentions might be. And we obviously can think of ourselves in that relationship as it relates to capitalism and in every other ism that we would come up with, that we are so embedded in it and so formed by it, malformed by it, that, and this is where I think analysis fails us, that we often are not aware of. I love that you use the word unconscious, and that's what led me to think about Fanon in his psychology, not only of the oppressed, but oppressors, that our psyche is like glued to these malformed ways of being, in much the way that some theorists have talked about, if you have a new fence made of new wood, and it's put beside a tree, what happens to it? They become entwined, almost inseparable. In fact, if you separate the fence from the tree, it damages the tree. That's how deeply malformed and formed we are in our spiritualities, our theologies, and our practices. What's the place? Imagination and solidarity that seeks to dismantle the sources of suffering dream of a world where we are generous, where our desires are shaped by deep relationality, where we have access what we need for ongoing creativity, co-creation, and our socially embodied religious and liturgical practices are embodied in the struggle to sustain all of creation. I mentioned that, I've mentioned liturgical twice now, and I mention it because the way in which these systems work within us and seduce us is through, I'm using liturgical, the work of the people, if you will, who are also tied into it. And the work of the people reproduces it. I think of what was it called? Without Sanctuary, which is a website that has all these photographs from mostly the mid to late 1800s of photographs of people who've been lynched. And what you find when you go to that site is that these lynchings would take place after a religious service and had a very similar liturgical life. So these would often occur on a Sunday after church, had a very similar liturgical life. So I say that to say, step by step, going forward, we engage in this liturgical life of malformation that imposes the destruction of the earth, the destruction of peoples, the destruction of cultures. We must direct ourselves collectively on the way into deeper action and solidarity with those whose lives are on the line at the intersection of death and life. So I end with this prayer. Let us not be conformed to this world. Our vision has to be more expansive, more loving, more beautiful, true, and just.
Thank you so much. I have another response here, and then we'll open it up very shortly. Let me affirm what I think both of my colleagues are talking about, is this complexity of being human. So there are no easy solutions, but there are solutions, and I think we're collectively working on them, and that's what we're trying to figure out. I want to respond to three things. One is this notion of utopia that was presented. The other one, people wouldn't be surprised to hear me talk about class analysis, and finally solidarity. The first one on utopia, I mean, I agree with what was said by Professor Sung, that a critique is not enough. If we use the term Capitalocene, it is not simply about pointing out all the predicament that we're experiencing. It's really in order to figure out what might be the appropriate solutions. And oftentimes the solutions emerge in the struggle itself, so this is not coming from the outside. The utopia, therefore, that I would be arguing for is precisely a utopia that is deeply rooted in the struggle itself. And here I would distinguish something like maybe a big utopia and a small utopia, a grand utopia, a small utopia, general one, specific one. Let me explain to you what I mean. If you think about utopia as the flourishing of human life, I think that's wonderful. In some ways, this is what we've been hearing: human dignity, the big terms, everybody having enough food, I think is crucial also. At the same time, if one thinks about, say, utopia as it emerges out of a worker cooperative, working people working together, if the basic problem is exploitation in the Capitalocene, the exploitation of human labor, productive, reproductive, and the exploitation of nature, utopia in this sense would not simply say humans living in peace, but it would be about collaboration, sharing profits, sharing, of course, also decision-making, sharing power in a way that's new. That type of utopia then can actually drive us forward to fairly concrete actions, but it comes not out of nowhere. It comes out of actual efforts to move within the system, beyond the system. In this sense, I would be arguing also with my old colleague and friend Franz Hinkelammer to say a general humanism is certainly great, better than this anti-humanism that we've been finding. But ultimately rooting this in human agency and therefore in human practical engagement of its environment, that might be a way of thinking about utopias a little closer to the ground, not simply because they're more practical, but ultimately I think they might be more honest in the sense of how far can we go? Always keeping in mind what Professor Sung was saying, that we're probably never going to get there completely. So this is part of our human condition, our human limitations. So in this sense, how do we think about utopias would be my first question. My second one, this is this question of matters of life and death. As Professor Sung was saying, this is what's going on in the Latin American context. And keep in mind, this is what's going on here also. When we're talking about whatever we're talking about, we're really talking about issues of life and death. If you look at life expectancy numbers in the Brazilian context, average life expectancy now is 72 years. I looked at the number in the US, it's 76 years. In Germany, it's 80 years. What the three numbers have in common, though, is that they're going down. Things are not getting better, they're actually getting worse. And so the life and death issue is moving ever closer to home. in various places. That is not to play now the Olympics of oppression, but it is to say, pay attention to this. As far as I'm concerned, that was my second point here, class analysis. This is the foundation. We have to look at these life and death issues as the early liberation theologians were saying, people dying before their time. And this is happening in many places. However, I think once you sort of have said that, you now really have to ask the question, where do the rest of us fit who are still alive? How do we actually figure out what the rest of society looks like? And I think here, especially in the United States, our lack of class analysis misleads us to think that people in the middle are somehow home free, maybe outside of the system, and they can reach in and help a couple of poor, unfortunate people. The other problem, of course, with class analysis, as my students all know, is that we maybe shouldn't talk about in terms of stratification, but in terms of the relationship of power. Now, in this relationship, it's very clear that the poor are at the bottom, but there's the working class, which is always the majority of a population, even in the United States, which is also not doing too well in terms of power relationships. And the middle class, for the most part, fools itself when it thinks it actually has the power to change anything. This is where it goes with the reflection of my colleague Dr. Shepard on privilege. There is a confusion of privilege and power that is due to a lack of class analysis that basically means that people that have tremendous privilege, myself included here, oftentimes kid ourselves when we think about how much power we have. Looking at my colleague, Professor Morrill here, we're on the faculty senate at Vanderbilt together, and we're reminded every meeting how little power we actually have. And this is not about complaining, this is simply a realistic assessment in terms of class analysis, that those of us who are in the middle should realize that we're actually, in so many ways, sharing more in common with those at the very bottom than with those at the very top. This is not to play anybody off, but I think it might help us then deal with privilege differently. Rather than feeling bad, employing privilege differently, employing privilege in a solidarity that's grounded not in some moral imperative, we must be in solidarity, but in the recognition that most of us are actually not really winning this game, and that even if we're doing well for a moment, these things can go away quickly, and life and death even threatens us. So human existence here for the 99% to be sure is precarious. That's not yet a class analysis, but I believe if we remind ourselves, the consequences are different. This is where it leads to solidarity. That's my third point here. We think about solidarity here not as a moral appeal. This is the liberal idea of solidarity. You must do more. Love your neighbor as yourself. You must do this. But simply as the reminder that maybe more of us are in the same boat. Not saying we're exactly alike, but we are actually, what kills them kills us eventually as well. We're building solidarity now, understanding that the neighbor is part of myself, even though I don't recognize it. No matter how individualistic I think I am, the neighbor is part of who I am. And therefore solidarity is something that is built in our common situation that we can activate, that we can actually build on in a way that brings those of us in the middle, talking about myself here, along in a way that's much more powerful than simply a moral appeal. And of course, it's totally different from right-wing solidarity that's built on sameness. And we're all alike. We're all the same kind. We're all the same DNA and so on. The solidarity I'm talking about, keep in mind, right-wing solidarity here is the dangerous one because it basically misleads people in wrong identifications. Nationalism is basically bringing people along, thinking the nation benefits them. Racism is bringing white people along, thinking that the Capitalocene benefits them. I call it unite and conquer, where it unites white people in order to conquer all non-white people, but also in order to conquer 80% of white people who are thinking what is happening at the top is helping them. Well, it may be to some degree, if you distinguish privilege and power, you can see we can stand on our little soapboxes, speak, shout, yell, speak truth to power, and nothing happens. So finally here, my challenge, and this is the question, how do we look at the realities that Professor Sung has been describing, not in terms of here we are, we can help, but what's happening to them is happening to us. How does that bring us into the struggle differently? Deep solidarity, as I keep saying, is then a way of understanding our differences, not only tolerating them, bringing them to bear, our human differences, our religious differences, all the other kinds of differences you can imagine. By looking at those who are enduring the greatest pressures in the system and ultimately death. So this is my hope that we can build a deeper way of working together that produces some energy that cannot come from us. Final word as a theologian, maybe this is where we have to start this quest for God again, asking the question, how are these things moving with or without us, and how can we become part of it? In the end, by the grace of God, that works the most miracles under pressure. So thank you so much for making us think about these questions, and looking forward to your own thoughts on this. Should we open it up right away, or Jung, would you like to have a quick response? Let's add a few more comments, reflections. Thanks again to our main presenter and to Dr. Shepherd as well. And we might have to use the microphone around the room, right? So I can bring it to you if you have any questions
I'll
or
bring it.
comments. Oh, Rachel.
I'll bring it
thank you.
around. Oh, I don't have a question, but I'll bring the mic around.
Yes, very good. Yeah. But you can also use the mic and have a question.
I wonder, do we need to rehabilitate some terms such as socialism to even have a chance at this, or do we need to invent new terms that mean the same exact thing, but aren't so undercut these days?
I'm sorry, thank you for your response. I want to start talking about the utopia, the concept of utopia, and then to use the socialism as the concept and as an experience example to use of the concept of utopia. Normally, the concept of utopia is used in political discussion. And what I like to say that no, before that, we need to think in another way, such concepts, utopic, no, I'm not, sorry, my brain is not connecting with my English part. Yeah, let's come back. How can we distinguish good action or good system to another good system? For instance, socialism is better or worse than capitalism. So one say, okay, no, socialism is better than capitalism. Okay, any kind of socialism? No. Okay, within the social system, socialism idea, which socialism we are talking? So in the time 1950s, the best socialism was Soviet Union system. In 60, no, socialism should be more democratic. So how is the criteria, the concept to say that which socialism is better? We need a best, a transcendental concept, what is socialism? Weber could say this modern, what is in English? This idea, concept ideal, the ideal concept, the ideal concept. Yeah, it's look like I'm talking. Okay, so when you say no, socialism should be democratic and humanist and not authoritarian, we change what is the best concept of the socialism. In order to say that no more Stalinist socialism, but more democratic, what is the change? The concept of transcendental. Because if let's say, we have the way to get the better socialist, modern, humanist, democratic, etc., but which one? What, A or B? Because historically, you see the difference. So we have to another concept. So this concept, I'm saying this transcendental concept that perfect, that realize, allow you to discern which one is better than one. So before you discuss about political utopia, this small utopia or big one, or political social, we need to learn or think that we have think in a different way what we have learned from the modern society or modern reason. Let us start saying that modern reason creates our problem. So the use of the basic foundation of the reasoning from the modern proposal, we cannot overcome our problem. So we have to think in another way. That is why I talk about utopia and discussing Kant. So you are Kantian? No. But we need something from Kant to say, because Kant doesn't talk about action. So we'll talk about action. So that is discussion. Is clear for you? Yeah, if you have problem with my pronunciation, then the question of the small utopia or big one, I think it's when you're acting, discussing, for example, cooperative, and working with the poor people, trying to create something that only beyond the just action, but make something for better for their lives. There is an action or system and another. How can you discern which one is better way? Again, we need some concept of what is the best cooperative system. And why should we do that? We are talking about some kind of the ethical and humanical, anthropological discussion, what we think about the best understanding of human being. So if you think human being is only laborer, you say, okay, that is the modern, the Soviet Union system. No, human being is more than that. Reason, art, religion. For in this process, this is a discussion about which part, what is transcendental concept of human being. Then after that discussion, what is the, so with this concept, we can see in the practice, or seeing this different practice, we can say this is bad one. Okay, so for instance, in my formation, I'm Korean, so Korean culture is very, very machist, patriarchal. So my idea of what is the best action, best community, there was no question of woman. When discussing with the other women, okay, I'm wrong, so what I do? I change my concept. Then, after that, I can see that this community, this black woman working, yeah, that is more important than I thought before. That this is changing of my transcendental concept. Clear? Then I can use about utopia in terms of politics. What is the best way to organize society? For capitalist system is the best one. So I said that, so there is utopia in capitalism. That is utopian, capitalist utopia. Because of that, I said, neoconservative Fukuyama, liberal guys, Keynesian, and neoliberal, three different way of thinking about economy, has some fundamental agreement.
Agreement.
Yeah, agreement. Okay. I'm thinking now in Spanish. Yeah. I'm looking for Spanish. Please help me. Yeah. Then, so because of that, you need to understand what is the utopia of capitalism, and their good news to criticize the people who are still thinking this is the best way for us. So, in order to criticize and to help the people overcome this temptation to get into the market system, we need this clear understanding what is the capitalist utopia and another utopia that are still creating, because we discuss a lot of over 3 days with Joerg about what is the best way. Yeah. Then,
Just very quickly, I think one question we have to ask ourselves is not what is the best system, but with whom are we working to recreate life, rather than bringing systems and concepts, but in solidarity. I don't think we throw them out of our head, but those emerge where we're doing the work that we're doing.
And as we're talking about work, I mean, one can say it's just work, but ultimately the foundation of it is human creativity. And if you think about what the Capitalocene does, it sucks this creativity out of us, not simply in the factory, but everywhere else, including the artists, including the creative workers, professors, pastors, you name it. And so once you think about what gets appropriated here, I think the question is, how do we build the alternative? And that, I think the socialism concept here is useful because it turns a few things around that we have taken for granted. Sometimes I say, this may sound heretical, socialism is as American as apple pie. What do I mean by it? Well, 2 things. One, as Americans, we're proud of democracy, as we should be, right? Of course, we are struggling with it. It's a concept that's also a utopia that's not yet achieved. But why limit your democracy to politics and the voting booth? What about democracy when it comes to the economy? Labor again, right? What would happen if we actually thought, and not only thought more about democratic economies, but started practicing it? So this was my earlier point about utopia. Once you start, say, a worker cooperative where you're in some ways functioning within capitalism, but you're also deconstructing it by turning the whole thing on its head, profit no longer trickling up, but accruing to the community. People not only getting what they produce, but also having a voice, having some determination. That, I would say, is ultimately the American dream. You work hard, somebody recognizes it, the society recognizes it, and something comes of it. The American dream as we have it now, of course, doesn't work, as we know. Why? Well, because profit always trickles up and labor is exploited. So not just if it were that way, but we're actually having places in this society of ours, a worker co-op, an organizing where working people are doing something else. What my colleague Phyllis is saying, with whom do we work, those kinds of things. Do we see these alternative spaces? And to rebuild it from there. So then socialism is not something that Marx once said, and it's certainly absolutely not the sharing of everything, including toothbrushes. That makes no sense. This sort of stuff, unfortunately, is floating around too much. Socialism is sharing. One student in India where I taught once had a T-shirt that said, "Sharing is caring," signed Karl Marx. Yes, that's great, but we can do a little bit better. And so this is how these, in my view, utopias then grow out of actual practices that are not in the future, but that are happening right now. And in this sense, maybe we call it something else, but I think it's still the old struggles that we're finding, realizing, of course, where this went wrong, and also making the corrections that you were talking about.
Other questions?
Thank you, Dr. Jung, for this. So this is, I think, a fairly simple question, which is, and it again has to do with the idea of utopia here, which is, so how do you avoid your transcendental concept or your utopia from being deformed? How do you protect it from what the social gospelers in the United States, Russia, was called the kingdom of evil? Maybe in Dr. Shepard's voice, how do you, from what I'm hearing, from what you're saying, Dr. Shepard, how do you make sure that those whom you're organizing, the movements you create, don't replicate the evils that you're fighting against themselves? So how do you keep your utopian pure?
Thank you. First things, you have to understand how I'm using the concept of utopia is it's condition to thinking. In order to know that it's better or not, I need a utopical concept. Yeah? Okay. So each system has his utopia. Because of that, I have written a lot of things about how, for instance, neoliberal thinkers, when talk about the problem of the society is less, we need more market and less state. Their idea is the best system, utopical system, is a system without state, union, only free market. From this perspective, they analyze why Lula government in Brazil is wrong, because they are intervening in the market. And for social democratic perspective, no, Lula should and must intervene in order to what? To give more social rights for the society. It's another utopia. Then the question is, 1950-60 social democracy idea is over. Socialism from the Soviet Union is over. Oh, you need another one. Okay. So how create then the distinction between imagination and concept? We need some kind of imagination. And Rieger, who I have studied, says imagination of the new society comes from community of the poor people. Because we are within the system, need something, but it's right. It has the life is some good. So because of that, what is the I will say in Brazil to say that how can you criticize, understand what real, what being faith, having faith in Christian or Jesus faith is? When you see a woman, a poor woman, black, gay, ugly, fat, old, and you still see human being, you have faith. Because you have seen what God has, how God has seen the human being. When you see people as God sees the people, you got. So this is faith. How is the imagination? How you put in the name, in language, in narrative? So he discuss about myth. We need myth. That is to how you explain, how to describe. This comes from poor people's community. Okay, but these people has no ability to talk about in concept. We need concept in organization for the planning, because poor people has no access to economy, to study. So what is the role or contribution of the intellectuals that comes from church and left-wing people? Is to be like, together with this community, to listen and see their suffering and taking seriously what they're talking what are desired, and to think how can you or systematize this idea and how put this idea in concept. Without concept, we cannot create plan the action. Yeah, that is how this ideological, metaphysical, or this philosophical discussion, and the discussion how can you plan that. So because of that, when we talk about cooperativism, okay, we have this experience, so we can say that, and someone will say, okay, this is better than other way of social problem. Yeah, that is the result of the dialogue between the people and intellectuals or organic intellectuals, like Gramsci said, in this dialogue. It's clear, okay? Then, so how we can avoid to go to the perverse utopia, or perverse make it our utopia perverse utopia? I am very Christian. We need repentance, prayer not pray. Please God said no. Pray that Jesus prayed. Going to in face of Jesus, in God, sorry, and to see my desire. What I'm desiring is my desire, or the desire that comes from God and to people. So your project is yours. That's God's project, or this really God's project that is good for poor people or the suffering people. So without the spirituality, we cannot avoid perversion of utopia.
Can we keep on pushing it though? I think one of the things that's really been fascinating and a good contribution to the conversation on how spirituality is a useful correction to utopian thinking is some of the work that American historians have done on the role of religion with slaveholders. I think if you think about how it is that prayer and worship, even again, we're going back to Dr. Shepard's point, the role that liturgy played within. So I'm still, religion is not something that, spirituality is not something that is, it's a tool. It can easily be deformed and turned to our ends, right? I'm seeing Bruce here speak. I'd love to hear what you had to say.
Let me suggest maybe one more question, and then first we will do the last question, and we can continue afterwards once we conclude. Appreciate it.
I guess question or maybe a comment building on what's been said, especially about poverty. I've been thinking throughout the talk, thank you, of Ignacio Ellacuría and how he spoke of, and John Sobrino after Ellacuría was murdered, continuing, that a contrast between a civilization of wealth and a civilization of poverty. So I think it's another rhetoric. They were both building off utopia concept, but a rhetoric. But the key thing about the civilization of poverty and their conceptualization, and I'm persuaded by it, is not that it's a glorification of poverty. That would be ridiculous, right? But rather, it is what I hear starting to touch on here toward the end, and that is the virtues of the poor. It's as basic and as old as the first generation liberation theologians that if we speak of a universal love of God, it has to be also a very particular love, right, for the poor, but in turn, that love has to convert everybody. And so I think where we might find some effort always at correction or purification, I agree with your final comment, Professor, it's going to come from being and learning from the poor. This is not to, again, romanticize the poor, but it's the experience that people have at times. I have so I'd like to say I'm not just, okay. When we see the kinds of messianic virtues that are exercised out of, they are exercised out of material necessity, but they are also extremely life-giving. Then we also discover, I have at least in my experience, I'm humbled by the very difference in the way in which people do any gathering, how the poor do it versus how we do it, because I'm not poor. My final point, I guess, I don't know if this helps, but is to say that very concretely, we in solidarity and communion have the openness, the desire, another good category, to be converted and expect and want to be converted, but especially to pay attention to those who exude life and a love for life, even despite it all, which is basically a definition of hope. And yeah, I don't know. But those were things that were just on my mind, and I will let you have this because you said we got to wrap up.
The question of the spirituality, I think that I'm now discussing in my mind, I'm working on, we need to go more to the notion of spirit, Holy Spirit, not the church, different from the spirit of the world, spirit of capitalism, spirit of the evil, the inverted justice as injustice, etc. So this some spirit that's so holy that beyond the church, the religions. So I have worked with Japanese religion, Buddhist group, etc. There is something that's holy, spirit. And what is this spirit is not in the pool. When we face the other people who is suffering in this encounter, this face-to-face, that we can both sides to feel the experience that the spirit of Holy is here. And so, because if you think poor people has spirit, no, poor people can experience spirituality when it goes beyond this egoist view and accept and meet, face another person. So in the counting, the face-to-face relationship, that we can find spirit. And the spirit is philosophically saying, that is what go over the line. So in order to we, Korean theology, middle class person, to have the experience of the Spirit, Holy Spirit, it has to go beyond my group, my egoist person, and to feel, you have to go there. Sometimes I can go there, but in my go to my writing a book. So as a theologian, I feel like I have vocation for theology, not only professional option. That is, when I write a book, I'm right because the market, the people are liking this. Or no, I said, yeah, I would like the people. Why don't you write about that? This is what's selling. Yeah, I said I don't know what to talk about that. I only say about that discussion, because this, in order to go beyond of the egoist feeling, to keep the sense of the spirit of holy here in my life, I have to go to discuss something that market don't pay, the church don't pay. That's only a possibility to don't deserve, to perverse good utopia. That utopia, in this sense, is the notion of the vocation. What is the perfect human being that I would like to be? this utopian option of my humanity. And spirituality is going to, so if the utopia is be reaches as possible, you have capitalist spirit.
Well, this is the conclusion of our evening. Let me thank our presenter one more time and maybe mention one thing that's really crucial here. What I didn't say in the beginning is the work that he's doing is deeply rooted in the communities. He's working with churches in various ways, accessible in many ways, in also different denominations from Pentecostal to Roman Catholic to Buddhist and other traditions. I think this is what pulls us together here ultimately. We're doing this work for the community, in the community, with the community. Thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to many more engagements in so many ways. This is all the time we have for tonight. As my